record onto this computer. There we go. So as I said, welcome this evening. Let's dive straight in and start to have a look at your different sensory personalities. Before we do that, I just want to mention a little bit about parent sense and play sense. So really, this for me is my passion, taking you with parent solutions all the way from pregnancy across to 5 years old. We have a pregnancy emailer, which is actually going to be launching next week. We have the app, which has a look at sleep, feeding, health, and development. We've got a sleep course and a postpartum course as well. And then, of course, in the Play Sense stable, we've got the Play Sense program. So a little bit about the offers that we have. So we have the Parent Sense app. Most of you are on it already. It covers everything from development and stimulation through to tracking your baby, feeds and sleep. And I'd really love for you all who are using it to go ahead and rate the app on the App Store, because it makes a big difference for us when we get a good rating. A little bit about Play Sense, because most of you don't know about it. Play Sense is my education program. It is a homeschool program that you can do with your little one at home that starts at 22 months. You can also do an online program where we have an online teacher who connects with you while you do your homeschool program, or you can have an in-home program or microschool program that happens in your home or in a teacher's home, only 6 little ones, and it's for children from 22 months through until 5 years of age. So we'd love for you all to join us in the Play Sense community. So tonight is really brought to you by both Parent Sense, my app, and also Play Sense, my education business. Right, I'm going to show you a little video now. Now, this was a video that was sent to me by a therapist who I taught one day when I was on a course teaching in Doha. And she said to me, have a look at this. When she heard about the sensory personalities, she said, you've got to see this. And while you watch it, I want you to try and guess what these babies are. Can you hear the sound? I hope so. All right, tell me if okay, sound's working. Thanks, Michelle. Right, what is that baby? You can see what that baby is, right? But look at his twin. Very different baby, right? Very different. So what do you guess? What is this baby? Who thinks, how many of you think, do number 1 if you think this one's a social butterfly. Write to number 1 in the chat. Right, and now for the rest of that, what do you think this baby is? So the baby on the right, what do you think it is? You can write it down. Okay, so that's a social butterfly for sure. And the one on the right, what are we looking at? A settled baby, maybe. A slow to warm up, maybe. Excellent. Okay, slow to warm up. Excellent. All right, so these are 2 completely different children. What's most fascinating about them is genetically they're the same ovum, same sperm, identical twins, same pregnancy, same environment. So look at their environment with their sibling, everything the same. Their nurture environment is exactly the same, and yet they are completely different. So the question is, how does this happen? Well, for those of you who've studied psychology, you'll know all about personality theory. And personality theory, there are many different theories about how children's personalities emerge and how we come to have our little ones being who they are. But most of the theories have bring into the fact that there's something about environment that makes a difference and something about temperament that makes a difference. So there's something that your baby is born with, and there's something about their environment that dictates what their personality is. So how do we get a temperament? Well, that's where the sensory theory comes in. And this is where, when we start to talk about the sensory baby, we're talking about the sensory processing that leads to their temperament. And that's what we're going to have a look at now. So most of you will probably know that your baby's has 8 senses that they take in sensory information from. And those 8 senses, you would have learned about 5 of them when you were at school, which was the sense of sight, touch, smell, taste, and hearing, the top 5. But then there also are these other 4, these other 3 senses that also come into the mix. And the one is the sense of balance. So with my eyes closed, I can feel whether or not I'm tipping over to one side or the other. And when I'm walking on something, I can feel. The next one is body position, which is proprioception. So as I move my arms open and closed, I know exactly where they are without even looking at them. And then there's the sense of interoception, which makes me feel full or that I'm out of breath or that my heart's beating fast. So all of the sensory information comes in to the human brain at all the time. So yours is coming in as we speak right now. All right, now what happens is that the sensory information comes in and it hits a layer or a filter, and we call that filter habituation. And so this is the way in which the brain filters out extraneous information. And so habituation really takes care of a lot of the extraneous information. So now, as you're sitting now, wherever you're sitting and listening to this, you probably hadn't noticed the clothes on your back because they've been on you for a while and you've habituated them. And so your sense of touch has been habituated. Now that I've brought your attention to it, you can feel that label in the back and you can feel the scratchiness and you feel the need to adjust it. Same as the bones under your bum as you're sitting there. So habituation takes care of all of that sensory information, so we don't have to notice it all the time. Now, how well your baby's brain habituates sensory information has a direct repercussion on their behavior. So if you've got a very low level of habituation, in other words, you don't filter everything, you often end up in a very overstimulated state a lot of the time. Likewise, if you have a high level of habituation, you don't take in everything that's in your environment, and so you end up with a highly well-regulated state, and so a more dormant child. And we're going to talk about those different personalities. So all of us, your babies, you, your husband, your partner, every single one of us has a high filter and a low filter. And I'm sure as we speak tonight, you're not going to be able to just identify what your baby is, but you're going to start to think about yourself and about your partner as well. Right, so let's have a look at these 4 different personality types. So the first personality type that we talk about is the social butterfly. Now, these 2 personality types on the right-hand side, the settled baby and the slow to warm up baby, and the settled baby and the social butterfly, are actually the very same type of habituation style. So both of these babies habituate an enormous amount of sensory information. So they've got high filters. And that means a lot can be going on in the world without them really taking notice of it and without them really, really processing everything. Now, what happens with your settled baby down here is that they kind of are blissfully unaware. So things can go on. They can have a dirty nappy. They don't even notice. A dog can bark in the room. They don't wake up. And so these babies tend to be very settled babies. They don't become easily overstimulated, and they can be quite unaware of what's going on, actually. And my middle daughter was one of those. And they really are a bit of a gift because they're quite laid back most of the time. And so we've got quite a few settled babies here tonight, which is awesome. I also call them con babies, by the way, because they con you into believing that you're doing it all right, and they con you into having another baby. And so I didn't just stop at 2, I went on and had a third as well. Your other sensory personality is your social butterfly. Now, your social butterfly is interesting because they usually do start off as settled babies, and in certain circumstances can look like a settled baby. But the social butterfly actually wakes up to the world, and it usually happens at about 4 months, and they kind of go, hold on, the world's a lot more interesting than I actually realized. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to really start to seek out sensory information. I'm going to seek sensory stimulation. I'm going to seek social interaction because it kind of wires me and it makes me feel good. And so your social butterfly is a busy, busy baby. They're always on the go. They're always trying to socialize. And I always say you'll know that you've got a social butterfly because you can't walk down the aisle in Waitrose or Pick n Pay without somebody stopping you and smiling at your baby. And the reason is that your baby keeps smiling at everyone. They woo everybody, they flirt with everybody, and they love social interaction. But for those of you who've got social butterfly toddlers, you right now at this time of night are completely exhausted because they are like Duracell bunnies. They go, 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 and they're exhausting. My firstborn was a social butterfly. So there you go. Those are your first 2 sensory personalities. They're the high filter babies. Then we've got our low filter babies. So our babies who really don't filter everything. They take in a lot of sensory information and they become easily overstimulated. And so we get our other 2 sensory personalities. Down here at the bottom is our sensitive baby. So for those of you in the audience who have a sensitive baby, it's very few of you, those little ones can really make you feel like a very unsuccessful parent because they're fussy and they're grimacy. And if the dog barks 3 houses away, they wake up and they typically don't sleep very well at night. They can be picky with meals and they just tend to over-respond to everything. And then, of course, you get your slow to warm up baby. Now, they're also sensitive. They've also got this low filter, but their brain has worked out that actually after a while, once you've got used to something, it's not so scary anymore. And so they are what we call slow to warm up. So initially, they are very reticent to engage. They are skeptical of anything new. But as soon as they can see that, that whatever it is that's new in the environment is actually okay, they really warm up and they engage wonderfully. And that's why, for those of you who are a bit confused, you came up with a slow to warm up, but you think your little one might be a social butterfly. The reason is that they're slow to warm up when they're in new situations and when they're under threat. And the minute that they have warmed up, like when they're at home with you in their comfort zone, they become a social butterfly. So that's why we often do get these children that kind of move between those. And for those of you who've got a social butterfly who sometimes looks like a sensitive baby, that's because your social butterfly doesn't have an off switch until it's too late, and then they become teary and overstimulated. So those are your 4 sensory personalities, and it's really, really interesting to know how your little one processes information. Now, that's all in fine and well, knowing exactly what they do, but we want to apply this to the three main areas of life. And for those of you who are using the app, and thank you for those of you who said it's a wonderful app, I so appreciate the feedback and that you're using it. So for those of you that are using the app, you'll know that there are 4 sections to it. There's the sleep section, the health section, the play section, and the feeding section. Well, tonight we're going to take 3 of those, which is health, which is not health, it's sleep, feeding, and play. And we're going to look at how do these different sensory personalities play out when it comes to play. Right, so let's start with sleep, the big challenge. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how these different personalities sleep. And I'm going to give you a couple of little tidbits of information about what you can do in order to help your little one in terms of their sensory personality. All right, so let's quickly just whip around the circle. So here we've got our settled baby. Our settled baby is typically a very good sleeper. And I told you this earlier, they classically are little ones that can actually sleep through early. They sleep through the dog barking. They typically are very, very good sleepers. Your social butterfly, they can be tricky to get to sleep. And they need really regular sleeps because they tend to become overstimulated because at the pace at which they're engaging, they need some downtime. Your slow to warm up over here, they often take time to wake up from sleeps and they need very specific sleep spaces. Remember, they're slow to warm up. So if something's new, like you go on holiday, sleep becomes a nightmare with them because they don't like things that are new. And when routines are all exactly the same, they're going to end up sleeping best. And then you've got your sensitive baby who tends to have very, very poor sleep cycles, their sleep patterns. They have short sleep cycles. They're cat nappers. They wake up after 15 minutes. They're very easily woken and they have very short awake times because they become overstimulated because their filters aren't working because they have got these very low filters. So let's have a look at each of these personalities and see what you can do about it. So what's going to happen tonight is you'll be able to switch off for the other 3 personalities other than what your baby is. Although if I were you, I'd be listening because next time around you could have something different. So let's start with your settled baby. So these babies, as I said, are typically good sleepers. They often do hold on to that day sleep for a very long time in the toddler years. They really love their sleep and they tend to sleep well over midday. They tend to sleep well at night in the toddler years. They're pretty flexible about where and when they sleep. Those are the babies that, and you see the parents who take their babies out to a restaurant at night, the baby kind of sleeps under the restaurant table, they take them home, they sleep just as well at night. If you did that with a social butterfly, they would be all over the place in the restaurant. And if you did that with a slow to warm up, they wouldn't know where they were and they would become very sensitive in that space. And so it's really only your settled babies that you can do that with, and they're flexible with sleep for a very long time, all the way through into the toddler years. So a couple of little tips that I want you to think about with your settled baby. For those of you that have got newborn babies who are settled babies and are sleeping very well, they will need to be woken up at night, in the day, sorry, not at night, in the day in order to feed, because they tend to be the babies that sleep right through feed. So instead of waking every 3 hours for a day feed, they might sleep for like 5 or 6 hours, and it ends up causing day-night sleep reversals. So for the newborn day feeds, try and feed them on cue or on according to a routine, and make sure they're awake after 3 hours so that you get them feeding by 4 hours if they're really stretching those day milk feeds. Now, in terms of nighttime, these babies tend to sleep through early, and sometimes as early as 6 weeks old, these babies are actually sleeping through the night. And it causes mums and dads a lot of consternation because you think, are they getting enough in the day that they can actually sleep through at night? My belief on babies who are sleeping at night is do not disturb them. Don't go and disrupt them unless you've been told to. And you'll be told to if your baby was prem and not gaining weight or was born small for dates. In other words, they were very small at birth. And those 2 scenarios of babies, you might be told to wake your baby at night. But other than them, I don't think you should be waking babies at night. And remember, with these little ones, if they're very stimulated, they might switch to a social butterfly. So if they've had a very stimulating late afternoon, or dad's come home and really stimulated them, they might then become much more like a social butterfly and much more difficult to get to sleep. And my final tip when it comes to your settled baby is don't boast about it, because nobody wants to know that your baby is sleeping through the night at 6 weeks old when their baby is waking up 10 times at night. So that's your settled baby. Moving on to your social butterfly. So remember, your social butterfly is wired by interesting things, and that means that their sleep can be easily disrupted. Why? Because sleep is boring, and so they fight going to sleep. They much prefer social interactions. They do tend to settle into good sleep habits in the toddler years as long as you stick to the rules. And the rules are make sure these little ones have got routines and that you keep everything the same. And one of the biggest tips I can give you, and I'm not going to run through all the tips here below, they're all going to be in the booklet that you're going to get tomorrow. But one of the most important things is that you must make sure that your social butterfly thinks that the world ends at 6 p.m. So how do you do that? You make sure, so let's say your bedtime is 7 p.m. or 6:30. 1 hour before bedtime, you're going to take your little one to the bathroom to go and have a quiet bath. And after bath time, you're going to take, and after your bath time period, you're going to take them into their room and do a bedtime routine, which includes a massage and reading a book and having a feed and putting down. And you're never going to leave the room. And this is very important. If you have got a social butterfly and having sleep problems, this is the one tip you need tonight. Do not take your social butterfly out of their bedroom after bath time. And the reason for that is that you can trick a social butterfly into thinking that the whole world ends after bath time. And if they think the whole world ends, they're not going to try and fight to get out because they don't think that anything else is happening outside of the room. But if a social butterfly knows that there's a party happening in the TV room when they're going to bed, you have lost the plot completely because you're never ever going to get them to stay in their room as toddlers. So from like 4 months onwards, with your social butterfly, you have a bath time routine, bedtime, you don't leave the room. Very important. Make sure that they have 15 minutes of calm just before sleep time. And many of you will say, yeah, you take them to the room, but they immediately start to niggle. And that's because something in the social butterfly's brain says to them, she's about to take away my addiction. She's about to take away the thing that's wiring my brain. And she's about to make it really calm. And I'm going to fight it. So they often start to fight bedtime just before you put them down. Another very important thing with them, don't do any TV after 4 p.m. TV is terrible anyway for sleep, but it's even worse for these babies. It disrupts the melatonin release that is part of the brain, that's in the brain that cues sleep, and it happens in the absence of light. So you don't want blue light coming from the TV at all with these social butterflies, please. And then you want to do lots and lots of moving activities in the late afternoon. So I've written here trampoline. You can also talk about swinging, the very last point, 15 minutes of swinging. Lots of physical and movement activities in the late afternoon. So, and that's before bedtime, before supper. And that's because we have a little velocity storage mechanism in the brain, which allows us to kind of ramp up the amount of movement that we've had or track the amount of movement we had in the day. And it helps us to sleep better at night. So for those of you who've been on a very big hike or done a massive marathon or a mountain bike race or whatever you've been doing, all that physical activity, you will know that you sleep much better those nights than the days that you've been sedentary. And the reason is that proprioception and vestibular information, both of which are sensory information that comes from activity, helps our brain to sleep better at night, but especially for the social butterfly. Right, moving on to our slow to warm up bubbas. So our slow to warm up bubbas can be good sleepers, okay, but it has to be with a good routine and when the environment is consistent. It's very important. Remember that these are the babies, because they've got a very low filter, they notice any change. So when they feel like maybe something's new in the environment, like they've got a label in the back of their clothes, or a routine has changed, or they're sleeping in a different space, like under a table in a restaurant, or in a camp cot at the hotel, they really feel that difference, and it really, really disrupts their sleep. So try and keep their routine and the environment very, very consistent, because they actually can be really good sleepers, but they need that consistent environment and routine. Remember that new situations and new changes are going to throw their sleep out. And I've had many patients who come into my practice and said to me after a holiday, I say, how was your holiday? They went, that was just the most pointless effort. None of us rested, because my slow to warm up baby noticed everything that was new in the environment and wouldn't sleep for the whole 5 days. And then just when they get home, they've started to learn to sleep again. And then of course they're home and there's another change. So new situations do really throw out their sleep. So that means that if you're going on holiday and you need to prepare a space because you know that the sleep environment is going to be different, start to prep it ahead of time. So one of the things that I like to encourage parents to do is to set up a camp cot. Like if you're going to take a camp cot away with you, set one up in the bedroom before you go away so that your little one gets used to just one change, which is a new camp cot. Everything else stays the same. The bedroom's the same, the routine's the same, the doo-doo blankie's the same, the curtains are the same, but the camp cot's different. And let them get used to that. And then take that camp cot with the doo-doo blankie and everything that supports your baby's sleep, take that on holiday with you. You're much more likely to get a better night's sleep when you're awake. These slow to warm up babies tend to also take a bit of time to wake up. And my third was a slow to warm up. And often she would need to actually just have some time to defrag after she'd kind of woken up, to wake up on her own, because she was quite grumpy just after she woke up, because it was an adjustment in terms of her brain taking in processing, or taking in sensory information. These are the ones, as I've said, fight sleep if anything is new and novel. They also have very important reliance on a sleep association object. So when we talk about a sleep association object, we're talking about a doo-doo blankie or a dummy or a little soft toy that they can hold onto. And these doo-doo blankies, dummies, and sleep association objects are very important, because they really do decrease the amount of separation anxiety that your slow to warm up little one will have. And these little ones tend to have worse separation anxiety, both at about 4 or 5 months, and then again at about 7 to 10 months. So they have this disruption because they notice the difference. So when you walk out the room, they keep calling you back. And that's quite classic with your slow to warm up. But if they've got this separation object, in other words, something that they can hold on to, and they know that they associate with it or associate with sleep, they then will be better sleepers. Another one with these little ones is that their habits become very quickly entrenched. So you need to make sure that whatever habits you're putting in place with your slow to warm up are habits that you want in terms of the long term. So if you're feeding to sleep, you're going to battle to change that habit, because remember, these little ones hold on to things. They don't like adjustments. All right. Then in terms of sleep and your sensitive babies, and I know we don't have many sensitives in the audience today, but we certainly will in the people who are going to actually be able to watch this. We're going to divide this into little clips just on sleep and feeds and play and so on. So if you've got a sensitive baby, they can be very, very tricky sleepers. Now, I do a sleep online course, in which we get babies to sleep through the night. My next one's actually starting on the 27th of September, and you can join that. But whenever we have that, and I've got a mom who's got a cat napper, and when I'm talking about a cat napper, I'm talking about a baby who only sleeps for 15 minutes day or night. So after 15 minutes, they wake up. You can set your clock by it. They very typically are sensitive babies, because what happens when you're sensitive is that everything that's going on in your environment is something that can disrupt you. So for instance, you can be disrupted by a sound 5 houses away, a label on the back of your baby grow, a little piece of sand that got into the bottom of the baby grow from the tumble dryer. So any of these things can actually disrupt your little one's sleep. And it's very hard to know what it is, but often it disrupts them at the end of that first 15 minutes of sleep. So how to solve this? First of all, watch these little ones' awake times. And you'll all know from using the app that on the widget, we talk about the awake times. So for newborn babies, it's only 45 minutes to an hour. For older babies, it's up to 3 hours. But watch those awake times, because these little ones need a sleep at the end of those awake times, because when they have their sleeps, they defrag and they reset their sensory load. But when they are not having sleeps, they do become overstimulated. They need regular sleeps. And for those of you who've got sensitive toddlers, you must have that midday sleep. And I personally am a fan of having a rest time at least, but preferably a sleep as well, all the way through until 5 years old. With these little ones, if there's any illness or reflux or any disruption of gas bubbles in their tummy, they're likely to wake up more at night, because they're very sensitive to interoception, to all of those internal sensory signals. All right, so let's go on to play. So at this point, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to be able to take about 15 minutes of questions, I think, at the end. And so if you do have questions, and I haven't covered it when we talked about sleep, do ask them now, and I will try and get to those questions at the end. I won't get to all your questions. We have a very big audience tonight, but I'll get to as many as I can. All right, so let's look at play and stimulation, because we really do need to stimulate our babies optimally, and this is the key to stimulating them. So the first thing is that how do they each react? So our settled baby, let's go back a slide, sorry about that. Our settled baby needs a lot of stimulation. So remember, these babies have got, really, they don't take in everything, and they tend to have laid back milestones. And by that, I mean that instead of sitting at like 5.5 months, they might only sit at 7 months. Or instead of crawling at kind of 7 or 8 months, they don't crawl until 10 or 11 months. Often they have slightly late social signals as well, like smiling, because remember, they're not really wired to really want that super high level of social interaction. So they tend to have very laid back milestones, and sitting in particular is their favorite milestone. They love to sit and watch the world go by. So your social butterfly, these little ones need a lot of sensory input and a sensory stimulation. They seek it all the time. So they want interaction. And this is, if you've got a social butterfly and you put them down to just kind of go and do something else, they'll immediately start whining and moaning because they want social interaction or stimulation, or in order to feel that they're in that optimal zone of arousal. They love stimulation. You're slow to warm up. They love to have routines, as I said, and they do love to engage with people and they love to socialize, but they only do it well when they are rested and in a set routine. So your slow to warm up will enjoy play dates. They will enjoy the social interaction, but they'll do it best when they are rested and when they're in their routine. And in your sensitive little one, with them, the secret less is more. When too much is going on in their environment, they do become very overstimulated. So when there's too many toys in front of them, too many people, too much noise, too much social interaction, too much of a mum and baby group, they tend to have their meltdowns. So let's see what we can do for each of these little different babies. So let's start off with the settled baby. So your settled baby, as I said, is often slightly slower on the slower side developmentally, and you mustn't worry about that at all because they all catch up at the end. And I'm not one to really get fastidious and focus too much on milestones, but these are the ones tend to have a little bit of laid back milestones. They don't learn to clap necessarily as early as others because they don't need to get your attention as much as others because they're much more laid back. They're very relaxed. They love to sit and watch the world go by. So what's important with these little ones? Well, one of the most important things is that they must be stimulated, because we sometimes the tendency is to not stimulate them because they're just so easy. We don't feel that we need to. And I once in my practice had a little baby who came in who was developmentally delayed. She wasn't just a settled baby. She was much more extreme than that. And all we needed to do was give her a little bit of extra stimulation because she just wasn't seeking enough. So lots of stimulation, lots of tummy time, lots of loves and cuddles, lots of opportunities for stimulation, interaction, and socialization. Those are very, very important when we're looking at a settled baby. For these little ones, I actually recommend scheduling at least 2 stimulation activities per week from 6 months onwards. So that can be a swimming lesson or a mum and baby group or music group. Really, they do very well when they are exposed to nice stimulation groups. They often need slightly more intensity and sensory experiences, so foster movement to get them to perk up a little bit. Slightly louder noises because they're habituating a lot of the sensory information. So sensory playtime for them, particularly as toddlers, is important. And then as toddlers, you can actually use their imagination to spark their engagement. So imagination is the gateway. It's absolutely wonderful. We do a lot of it in Play Sense, but from about 18 months onwards, you can put a hat on your head and say, I am the cowboy, or whatever it is, I am the princess, and use their imagination to help them to engage socially. Remember that these are the ones can move into being a social butterfly when they are optimally stimulated. So the more you stimulate them, you might find the more they seek it, which is really, really wonderful. And they love lots of movement play and lots of angular movement games. Lots of music too. So stimulate your settled baby. It'll be fabulous for their brain processing. Well, what about your social butterfly? Well, your social butterfly wants lots of stimulation all the time, lots of stimulation, lots of socialization, and they can become quite irritable and whiny when they're not stimulated. So what's the secret with them? Well, definitely more is more. More music, more social interaction, more outings, more walks in the garden, more pointing out things, more stories to read. So more is more. But you do need to watch them because they can be like that Duracell bunny who goes, and then they suddenly drop. And that's because they become overstimulated. So you must schedule some downtime with these little ones. And for them, the best type of downtime that I like to recommend is actually a walk in nature, because what nature does is it actually gives your brain a chance to kind of switch off and chill out. But for the social butterfly's brain, it still feels like they're getting a little bit of stimulation. So these little ones, you need to have scheduled social engagements. So you don't have to do a play date every day, but they will love play dates. And the more social interaction they have, the more social they become. And then for stimulation classes, you can enroll them in swimming lessons, movement stimulation, and music-rich classes. Those are the type of things that really float their boat. But of course, with these little ones, you're always going to be wanting to watch their signs for overstimulation. And so the signs for overstimulation is tugging at the ear, rubbing the eyes, turning away, getting hiccups, posseting if they're little babies. And all of these signs of overstimulation can indicate to you that they've just had too much. And so particularly for your little social butterfly, your 4 to 5 month old, please watch carefully for those signs of overstimulation. When they're toddlers, you're going to need to toddler-proof the space. And for those of you who've got toddlers, you'll probably know the scenario that social butterflies tend to be climbers. So they climb the burglar bars, they climb anything they can get on top of. They climb on top of the coffee table and stand there because they are adrenaline junkies. They want to be higher, faster, you know, and kind of throw themselves off things. So you really need to toddler-proof the space when you're dealing with a social butterfly. One of the things that actually works quite well to calm them down a bit while it gives them stimulation are sucking games and vibration games. So if any of you have seen those wiggly pens or even a vibrating toothbrush, actually giving them that to get their sensory stimulation is a good idea, because that's a wonderful regulating form of sensory stimulation. And then you can encourage lots and lots of stimulation activities and socialization. So these little ones tend to do very well when they are in a play date with another social butterfly. They kind of spark each other and have lots of fun together. So what about your slow to warm up baby? Well, your slow to warm up baby is more cheerful when the routine is consistent, which we've mentioned. And so you need to really time their play and stimulation according to certain times. So make sure that they're well rested and then have socialization. So I love play dates with these little ones straight after nap. So if you finish your nap at 2 o'clock, have a friend come over just after that. Remember that novelty isn't their best. So when they move into a new situation, like for instance, a mom and baby group, and they've got to meet new toddlers, or they go to a birthday party, they will generally stick to you. And I often call them Velcro babies. So they kind of like stick like little limpets to you. And 5 minutes before the end of the birthday party, they warm up and then they go and engage with all the other children. And then they don't want to leave. And that's because they've taken their time to warm up. And now you've brought another change of them having to leave. They can also, as toddlers, tend to be quite bossy. Because they like to say exactly how it's going to be done. And they tend to be quite specific about the way that it's got to be done. And you'll see this. I mean, for some of you, you might kind of feel like the whole household revolves around your baby, around their routines, around what they want. It's often with our slow to warm up babies, because they just, if you do it any other way, it's not worth the pain. So you end up just doing it the same way that works best for them all the time. For these little ones, a routine works really well. And they like to get into knowing what's coming next. So for instance, if you join a play sense play group as an example, or any play group, you're going to find that you want to have a really set morning routine so they know exactly what's coming. I wake up and I get dressed and I have breakfast and then I have some tea and then I get in the car and then I go to play school. Because if you disrupt that exact routine, by the time they get to school, they're going to be really crotchety. So you really do need to make sure that they are that their routine stays fairly consistent. Now, these little ones, because socialization is so important, and these little ones don't jump into social situations, it's worth picking their friends carefully. And by that, you want to have play dates, but you want to have them in small numbers. A play date of 3 toddlers with your 13-month-old is going to overwhelm them. Okay, so try and keep your play dates 1-on-1 or 1-on-2. And try and find little friends who are a little bit more predictable. So these slow to warm up babies do very well with settled babies, because the settled baby is quite happy to sit on their bum and interact from there. And the slow to warm up likes the predictability of that. The slow to warm up doesn't love being with a social butterfly, because the social butterfly is all over the place. They're noisy, they're loud, they're bouncy, they fall into them. And so the slow to warm is kind of very reticent. It's a bit like Eeyore and Tigger. So Tigger bouncing all over the place and Eeyore going, wait. I'm just trying to work out my space here. And so watch the type of friendships and the number of children that your little one is exposed to. Please do not disrupt day sleeps for parties. So if your friend has scheduled a party on Saturday at 12 o'clock and your slow to warm up sleeps from 12 to 2, don't disrupt that sleep, because with these little ones, it just isn't worth it. You'll arrive at the party, they will be man down, they will be moaning, they'll never leave your side, and then they'll fall asleep on your lap just before you leave, because they don't like having their sleeps disrupted. In terms of stimulation classes, these babies do really well if you can find a baby signing class. And baby signing classes are wonderful because baby sign language is what they can learn just before they learn to speak. So it's not exactly the same as hard of hearing sign language, but we use it for little babies, and it allows them to start to express themselves. And communication for these little ones is very important. So you'll often find a slow to warm up baby is actually quite a tricky toddler until they've got their words. And the minute they've got their words, they become social and engaged, because they can actually command the space and they can actually control the space much better once they've got words. So words are very, very important. And you'll see the second last bullet down here is that they use tools of the mind and language, so that as soon as they can articulate how they're feeling, they become much, much easier toddlers. With these little ones, less is more, so don't overstimulate them, because they remember that their threshold is low and they will flip into being overstimulated. They do need exposure to sensory activities, and sometimes they avoid it. So these little ones often don't like putting their hands in shaving cream, or they don't like playing in the, kind of in the more sensory spaces, but they need to be challenged. They need to have their senses stimulated. So you want to have a little bit of stimulation, but within a predictable routine. And then a really good idea for them, and here is the tidbit for you guys, for your slow to warm up baby, very important. You must have a calm down tent. And a calm down tent can also be known as a timeout space, but not in the way of it being part of discipline. A calm down tent is a little tent that you put up in the corner of your lounge, or in the corner of the TV room, or in the corner of the kitchen, or in their bedroom, that has just the stuff they love. So their little doo-doo blankie maybe, and some dummies if that's what helps them to calm, and maybe a book and some music and some lavender drops. And that's a space they can go when they're starting to feel overstimulated, because remember, these little ones can get overstimulated. Now, a lot of these tips actually pertain to your settled baby as well. So for those of you who've got settled babies, when you get the lecture tomorrow and you get the notes, you can read up on the slow to warm up as well. So your sensitive baby, it is a case of less is more in order to prevent overstimulation. And these little ones become so easily overstimulated. Any social interaction, anything that's unpredictable can push them over the edge. So for these little ones, stick to your routines, watch your wake times carefully, because your wake times will let you know how long they can actually be stimulated for. So for those of you who've got little ones under 6 weeks of age, we are on newborns, their awake time is only 45 minutes to an hour. Now, in that, you've got to feed, you've got to change a nappy, which only leaves about 3 minutes for stimulation. And you might be thinking, how do I fit all this stimulation in such a short period of time? But the reality is that that short window of awake time allows just for the right amount of stimulation, particularly for these sensitive babies. So don't worry about stimulating them too much. Just being alive at 6 weeks old is a lot of stimulation. So don't worry about pushing stimulation too much. Remember that less is more with these ones. So don't put a whole lot of toys around them. So when they've learned, when they're 6 months old and they're sitting and there's toys around them, when there's too much going on, they'll become overstimulated. Less is more. Always schedule play dates and that type of thing for after sleeps. Sleep is very important, and use lots of quiet activities. Things like reading. They love reading. They love doing things like reading and Lego as toddlers. And then for stimulation classes, it's small groups, less noisy activities, and things like massage classes are the things that really work well. And, don't be scared with your stimulation classes of being picky and moving from one to the next. I certainly did that with my little ones, that if I could see that, for instance, my slow to warm up, like I took her to a music class, she hated it because it was way too noisy. It was all too over the place because she was more sensitive. But when I took her to something that was quieter interactions with a lovely specific routine, she absolutely loved it. Remember, with these ones, have a calm down tent and a space with things like lava lamps and smells. That really works well for them. All right, so we're going to get on to feeding now, and we're going to talk about the different sensory personalities and feeding, because the way that you wean your baby is very different according to their sensory personality. So how many of you have got the Weaning Sense book? Give me a thumbs up if you've got the Weaning Sense book, or put a number 1 in the chat, because the Weaning Sense book is based around, okay, great, Elrie's got it. So the Weaning Sense book is based around weaning your baby according to their sensory personality. So it's really a fabulous way to wean your baby. All right, so let's have a look at how we do that. So your different sensory personalities. Your settled babies are generally great feeders, okay? Your social butterfly, they like really strong tastes. They like lots of different flavor. They like lots of different texture, and they can be quite distractible. And we're going to look into these in all more detail. Your slow to warm up often presents with breastfeeding challenges because they're not too sure about that breast thing, because there's a lot going on when you're breastfeeding and when you're being breastfed. There's a lot of sensory information going on. We're going to talk about that now. But once they settle into a certain type of feeding, they get really stuck there. They love it to be just like that. And as toddlers, their favorite word at mealtime is no, and to close their lips, because anything that's new, they don't want to engage with. And then finally, your sensitive baby, they often have breastfeeding challenges because they, again, are very sensitive, like the slow to warm up. They don't like bottle transitions, and they really do have a tricky time moving on to solids. So your sensitive baby is going to give you a tough time with meal times. All right, so let's have a look at what we can do about each of these. So let's start with your settled baby. I mentioned that they settle into a feeding routine really easily, and they tend to be very easy feeders. So they settle into a feeding routine. They don't mind the breast, they don't mind the bottle, they don't mind moving on to solids, and they're quite gregarious with what they'll try. A couple of things about them. As a newborn, they can be a little bit choky at times, especially if you've got a fast flow. And that's because they're quite laid back. And so, you know, kind of just taking in the sensory input that requires what we call the suck, swallow, breathe. So the suck, swallow, breathe is what you have to do in order to breastfeed. You've got to suck, you've got to swallow, and you've still got to take a breath. And they battle with that kind of feedback from their body, because remember that they have a very high threshold, so they're not getting all the feedback. And so they tend to be a little bit more choky. So a nice solution for that, if you've got a choky baby and you are breastfeeding, just lie on your side and let them feed next to you if they are a settled baby. Sometimes these babies have a slightly low appetite, and that's because one of our senses, you'll remember, is interoception, which is getting those signals from within us. And so these are the ones don't get all the signals from within them, so they don't actually perceive hunger, and that's why they sleep through so well at night. So they often have a slightly low appetite. But once they're going, once you've got them into a meal, they can tend to overeat. And the reason for that is that they're, again, not getting the interoception. They're not getting all those signals from inside to say that I'm full. And so for your toddler who tends to just keep going and keep going and keep going, it's worth actually teaching them words like, are you full? Do you feel full now? Because those type of words will help them to understand that actually they are starting to feel full. And that's what that signal means. So they start to feel the signals based on the words that you say. So how do you introduce solids to these babies? Because breastfeeding and bottle feeding is going to be straightforward. Well, with them, you want to have a rapid introduction of new flavors and textures. So you can jump right in. And that's one of the things we do in the Weaning Sense book. We go very, very quickly through all the different flavors and textures, because these are the ones are going to really engage beautifully with all the new flavors. They tend to readily engage with new experience without resistance. And you can actually use meal times to spice up their life. And you can even start to turn them into a little bit of a social butterfly, because they take in, as they take in new flavors and tastes, it increases their arousal levels, so they become more animated. So meal times can be lots of fun with these little ones. What about your social butterfly? Well, of course, just like everything else in life, bland and repetitive is boring. So one of the things that often happens with these little ones is that you start them on solids. They start really, really easily on solids. And then after a week, they're sick of it. And when you look at it, it's because you've introduced something that's very bland and you've stayed with it for too long. So they don't want butternut for 3 weeks. They don't want rice cereal for 3 weeks. They want lots and lots of interesting things. As breastfeeders, they tend to be great breastfeeders until about 4 months, when they become distractible. And I'm sure many of you have had a baby at your breast and they're busy sucking away and they're turning their head away to look over their shoulder at somebody, tugging at your nipple, and they often are your social butterflies, because they really are interested in what's going on in the world, and feeding is quite boring, especially if you're staring at somebody's chest at that close proximity. Like, it's boring. So they keep wanting to pull off and see what else is going on. So they can become tricky at about 4 months in terms of breastfeeding. And so one of my suggestions for that is to actually feed in the dark or feed in a very quiet space, because if there's anything going on in the environment, and I can remember very clearly with my firstborn, who was a social butterfly, feeding him at a wedding at 4 months old. And until then, he'd been an easy feeder. And suddenly it was impossible. I couldn't feed him because he kept wanting to watch what was going on. So for them, you want to feed them in a quiet space so they're not too distractible. One of the things with social butterflies is that once they start with solids, they go off milk very quickly. And that's because milk is boring. It's always tastes the same. The temperature is always the same. And it just, doesn't liven up life. Whereas solids are new colors, new flavors, new textures. And so they tend to drop their milk very quickly once they're in solids. And one of my pieces of advice for that is to just always remember that milk is your priority until 6 months. So always make sure that you let your little one fill up on milk and have solids afterwards as an experiment, rather than being the big focus until they're 6 months old. From 6 months onwards, the balance shifts towards solids, and then it doesn't matter if they go off milk. And they do actually tend to go off milk very quickly after 6 months. They just wean themselves down. So a couple of things with them, if you're watching your baby's signals in terms of them when they want to wean, you could start to think that a social butterfly wants to wean at like 3 months, go into solids at 3 months, because they're interested in your food and they're getting bored of milk, and you think, I must move them onto solids. But just remember, we don't want to wean our babies too early, and 3 months would certainly be too early. So wait until your baby is a little bit older before you rush in with solids. Okay. Another thing is, really do introduce foods at a rapid rate and have a very varied diet with lots of flavors and textures and colors. Another thing is to really allow them to use the mealtime experience to actually experiment with all their different senses. They love to put their hands in the mess, to smear it on their face, to spit it out, to smell it, to look at the colors, to mix the colors together. And so you have to be quite kind of resilient as a mom. So all our 8-time type moms and dads, you need to suspend that at the kitchen door when you go and feed a social butterfly, because it's going to be messy. You need to actually ignore the mess, because that's just part of the process. Another thing that works very well with them is modified baby-led weaning from 6 months old. So baby-led weaning, you'll probably know, is where babies actually feed themselves whole steamed foods. I don't believe in strict baby-led weaning, because I think that it delays solids a little bit too late for their manual dexterity. But I do think that once they hit 6-7 months, it's really awesome if they've got the experience of whole steamed food, as well as the bowl of mush that you've got in front of them. If you've got a toddler who'll only sit down for 2 minutes, which is very common with social butterflies, they'll sit down, quickly eat a little bit, and then they want to go. And that's because meal times can actually be boring if you want to just be on the go and if something else is interesting in the environment. So there you're going to need to use distraction with your toddlers. So toddlers need healthy food. They need food that has a lot of variety, but they also sometimes need a bit of distraction. And one of the things that I love to use is one of those spaghetti, or not spaghetti, herb jars with all the holes in the top, and take hard spaghetti and let them post them through it as soon as they've got that sort of manual dexterity. And it just helps to keep them distracted. Or funky placemats or plastic books that you can read together. Use distraction with your toddler. And then when your toddler becomes a little older, they're actually going to eat best when they're in a social situation. So have the cousins over, have friends over, or just let them eat at the family table with you and your partner, because that's really great for them. All right. 2 more, and then we're going to get to questions. So what about your slow to warm up? So your slow to warm up baby resists changes. So they resist milk changes. They don't like going from breastfeeding to bottle feeding. They like to stick to one type of feeding. So once they're on milk, once they're on breastfeed, they want to stay on breastfeed. If you need to move them onto a bottle, they're going to resist that nipple. Because why? There's a change. They don't like change. Now, that's very important for those of you moms and dads, or particularly moms. Let me talk to moms for this one, who are going back to work and you're breastfeeding a slow to warm up. You are going to need to introduce bottles before you go back to work. And it is worth doing that earlier than later. Unlike the settled baby, who you don't need to introduce bottles early to, because they're going to switch anyway. They don't mind what they have. Your slow to warm up gets stuck on a certain nipple type, and it can be your breast nipple, and then they don't want to move on to other things. So just make sure that's at the back of your mind. Remember also, your slow to warm up babies do not like surprises and too much variety, so they can actually present as fussy toddlers. So these little ones, if there's a lump of hard potato in mashed potato, they really won't like it. Or if there's a pea inside the mashed carrot, a whole pea in the mashed carrot, that's a different texture. They don't love it. Now, at this point, just before I come up to the end of the questions, I forgot to mention earlier on that we are going to be giving away a lifetime subscription to the app. And I think there's another prize as well. And it's going to be given for those of you who do who share on social media. So please share on social media, mention what type of sensory personality your baby is, and tag Parent Sense and Play Sense and Meg Faure, 3 tags. And one of you is going to win a lifetime subscription, or I think it's a place on my sleep course, and we're going to announce that on Friday. So please do enter that now. Right, going back to our slow to warm up, Bubba. So just a couple of things. First of all, they often are very resistant to breastfeeding in the early days, because remember that their sensory space is that they become overstimulated. Breastfeeding is very sensory laden. You smell, there's this touch of feel of your clothes, of your body, your sounds, and they often take a bit of time to establish breastfeeding. But once they're on the breast, they tend to be very good breastfeeders. The one challenge is you do need to introduce bottles and nipples if you are going to be going back to work. That is important. Another very important thing with these little ones is to really avoid stage 1 jarred smooth baby food. So I'm not a fan of jarred baby foods, because I think that they classically are too smooth. I prefer homemade food. And for those of you who know that we have a weaning sense feeding range, which is available in Checkers, and it's also available on through YouCook. Now, those foods, we made them very specifically with lots and lots of texture, because we don't want little ones to get stuck on smooth jarred baby food. And your slow to warm up really do get stuck. If you've given them something that's too smooth, they'll never go to lumps. Remember also that sometimes they can need like 14 exposures before they can actually engage with something. So they tend to need a lot of exposure before they think something's safe. Because remember, anything that's new is considered dangerous until it's proven safe. So they need a lot of exposures. Also, don't have surprises in food. You can also keep the food separate. So keep your mashed carrots together, keep your rice in a pile so they can actually see what they're eating and that the food actually looks like the texture that it's going to be. And then very importantly, the last point on this slide is please remember that it's not supposed to be a war zone. Your slow to warm up baby tends to like control. They tend to like to have the final say. And if you are a parent who likes to have the final say as well, you can end up clashing heads. And meal times is the one place you don't want to have it. So please read weaning sense, understand how to honor your baby at meal times. And then finally, your sensitive baby. It can be very tricky to be feeding a sensitive baby. It can be a minefield. They tend to be picky eaters. They often get stuck on whites, and that's white breads, pasta, all of fried foods. They tend to get stuck there. So just remember with your sensitive baby that you need to just be patient with them. They also need these 14 exposures before they accept things. And remember, when things are getting really tough for you and your sensitive baby, it isn't your fault. It's got to do with their sensory personality. And I think that knowing that this is more about them than it is about you is often quite liberating. Don't fight them at meal times and don't be slave to a scale. It's very easy with our sensitive babies who are picky eaters to get worried about their weight gain and be watching their weight gain all the time. But if your baby is sleeping okay and they're thriving, then you don't have to be slave to the scale. All right, and then with them, you want to go with slightly blander flavors. They tend to like their blander flavors. And another thing you need to know with them is that there's a big difference between a gag and a choke. So a gag is when there's a bit that goes towards the back of their mouth, and because they're more sensitive, they kind of do a gag, whereas a choke is when it's something in their airways. So if there's a gag, don't worry about it, don't react to it. If there's a choke, obviously you do want to. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to now just mention very carefully and very briefly that there is such a thing as goodness of fit. There is your sensory personality and your baby's sensory personality. And it's how those two things come together that really does make the difference. And one of the things that you're going to get in your booklet that comes tomorrow in your pack is how to match your sensory personality with your baby's sensory personality. And it's really useful information to assist you as you parent your baby. So I am going to stop there. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to go across to our chat and to our Q&As, and I'm going to answer some of your questions. All right, so there we go, Lisa. I have I've got twin girls, and one is a social butterfly. The other is a settled and slow to warm up baby. We're not sure which yet. Both have never been great day sleepers, 20-minute naps, but at night they sleep much better. However, one twin has a lot of interrupted sleep at night. Is there a way to improve it? So when you've got twins with different sensory personalities, I always default towards the more sensitive of the babies. So, you know, your slow to warm up baby, your settled baby and your social butterfly are a lot more flexible with sleep times than, for instance, your slow to warm up. I have a feeling you've probably got a social butterfly and a slow to warm up. And your slow to warm up will look like a settled baby when they're in their comfort zone, so when they're with you. But their default point when they go somewhere new is that they'll become a little bit more mummy fussy, maybe a little bit more anxious. And so if you've got a slow to warm up in your social butterfly, gravitate towards what your slow to warm up needs. And then your social butterfly, fit them in with that. That's the best advice. All right. Okay, so here's a question. What type of preschool should my toddler be in if they are slow to warm up? So remember, go back to what I said about the slow to warm up baby. They do best with predictable routines, with a teacher who is going to be focused on their sensory personalities, and also in small groups. So remember, the bigger the class, the more overwhelmed they're going to be. And one of the things that we actually do in Play Sense is we actually train our teachers in this. We train our teachers how to look for the sensory personality. So when your little toddler comes into the environment, and your teacher will know, okay, this is a slow to warm up, and she'll cater the whole space specifically for your slow to warm up baby. So I would definitely say that Play Sense would be a very good option for your baby if they're slow to warm up. But any small school with small numbers of children in a home-like environment, not in a big overwhelming space, would be very important for your slow to warm up baby. This is a great question. I knew it was going to come up tonight. Can a baby have a combination of sensory personalities? My baby's very settled, but she's also very visually aware and sound sensitive, and she does reach her milestones earlier than expected. So I will put my bottom dollar on the fact that she is a social butterfly. She's very visually aware, she's sound sensitive, so she's immediately notices any sound in the environment. She's reaching her milestones earlier, and that says to me that she's taking in and seeking lots of sensory information so that her milestones can be accentuated. And that's why we see that difference in milestones between the settled baby and the social butterfly. They've got the same profile, but our social butterfly is saying, I need more in order to get my development sorted. All right. Okay, so I'm going to switch across in the last 3 minutes this is a great question. I have to answer this one from Maria. This is a great question. She said she has a butterfly baby, and it's all the time with mom, because mom is a home mom or a stay-at-home mom. Is it a problem for his development? So the answer to the question is in that goodness of fit. It's definitely not a problem for his development. I love the fact that some babies stay at home for a longer period of time with moms. If you're an at-home mom, it's brilliant for them emotionally. But he does need social interaction. And if you, mom, you need to look at your sensory personality. So tomorrow when you get your booklet, look at what your sensory personality is. If you are a settled mom, you might not be stimulating him enough. So make sure that you're putting in lots of stimulation and socialization opportunities if he's at home with you. All right, Catherine says, I have a social butterfly. My husband and I were just discussing it today. Was it something that we did that makes her need constant attention and socialization? How much of it is nature? How much of it is nurture? She is a delight, but it is exhausting. Catherine, you and I both, my firstborn was the same, and it was absolutely exhausting. And I always think actually that it has more to do, it has to do with something in their nature. And probably either you or your husband is an adrenaline junkie, needing stimulation, social interaction, and one of you is wired like that. And that genetically then moves on into your baby. So usually there is definitely a genetic component. Having said that, we can also shift our babies' personalities by giving them an environment that's very stimulating. So when lots is going on, you might be making them even more of a social butterfly. So you're going to need to balance it for them and make sure that she's getting the right amount of stimulation. All right, my very last question for the night, and I love this question. How can I help my sensitive toddler with social skills? So our sensitive little ones are like Velcro babies. They stick to us, they want to be with us all the time, and they really are hard to get socially engaged. So a couple of things. Number one, you must have play dates with all of your babies, with all of your little ones. Your social butterfly is going to seek it, but your sensitive baby needs it. Make sure you match those personalities. Have a look at trying to put your sensitive toddler with a settled baby as an example, or very often a sensitive toddler does very well with a slightly older child, because older children are much more predictable than toddlers who are highly unpredictable. So pair your little ones with the right person, okay, first of all, with the right friendship. But secondly, socialize your sensitive baby in small groups. And again, I know I'm going back to play sense, but it is the very, very best place for little ones who've got low thresholds, because they're in small groups with teachers who understand their sensory personality, and small groups of children so they're not overwhelmed. So that would be an important thing. There are so many stunning questions today. And is my very last question. Okay, so it's about the app. So that's why I'm answering it. She said, I use your app. And I see you have a sleep course coming up. Is it different from the advice in the app? So all of the advice that I give does align. So my theory is always exactly the same. However, having said that, the sleep course is much more in-depth, because it's me talking to you, it's me interacting with you. We have WhatsApp groups, I answer your questions. And so it's really highly interactive. So that is the reason why moms who come out of the sleep course end up with little ones who sleep through the night or sleep so much better, because it's the most personal interaction you can get from me over a 3-week period. So the course is different. Having said that, and for those of you who want proof of this, go and watch my Insta Live from last Friday, which was actually on sensory personalities. I had a twin mum on who's got two twins who's 6 months old, who are both sleeping through the night, and she puts it down to the app. And the reason is that the app will give you the right routine and the right guidance to move you towards having your baby having great sleep habits. So start with the app, and if you're coming unstuck, move on into the Sleep Sense course. That would be my advice. So that brings us to the end of this evening. I am so sorry I never got to all your questions, but I promise you're going to get some wonderful emails coming through over the next few days, talking about all the content here tonight. And really, thank you so much for joining me. It is always my pleasure to be able to interact with you. It is my life's work. It is what I'm passionate about, just coming alongside you and helping you with your little ones. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. And if you are loving the app, please go now for me and review it in the App Store, because it makes such a difference to our ranking. So thanks and good night.